Okay, let's dive into this story because it is one of the wildest, most infuriating tales in the entire history of music. It's about a true rock and roll legend, a voice that defined a generation, who ended up in a legal fight so absurd you'd think it was made up.
I mean, really, think about that question. How can you be sued for plagiarizing yourself? It sounds like a joke, right? How could you possibly steal something that you yourself created? Well, for John Fogerty, the guy behind Creedence Clearwater Revival, this wasn't some hypothetical question. It was a very real, very expensive nightmare.
And you can hear it straight from Fogerty himself. He put it so bluntly, and it just cuts right to the heart of it. This wasn't some funny legal curiosity. This was a serious, multi-year attack designed to break him, both financially and creatively.
So let's get into the details of this absolutely infamous lawsuit. How on earth did this even end up in a courtroom?
Okay, so here are the players. The year is 1985. John Fogerty has just made this massive, triumphant comeback with his album Centerfield. But his old record label owner, a guy named Saul Zaentz, who owned all the copyrights to the classic Creedence songs, well, he wasn't exactly thrilled. Instead, he sued Fogerty, claiming that his new hit song, The Old Man Down the Road, was a ripoff of his own 1970 hit Run Through the Jungle. The whole argument was basically that by sounding like himself, Fogerty was infringing on a copyright that Zaentz now owned. It's just mind-bending.
And this is where the story gets a really painful personal twist. It's a betrayal, really. Fogerty found out later during the trial that his own former bass player from Creedence had gone to Saul Zaentz and basically said, "Hey, John is ripping off the old Creedence sound, you should sue him." And the horrible irony, as Fogerty points out, is that he had personally taught this guy every single bass line he ever played. So it wasn't just a professional fight, it was personal.
But this lawsuit didn't just happen in a vacuum. It was really the final straw after a long history of being chewed up and spit out by the music industry machine. And you can just see this pattern playing out over decades. I mean, way back in 1964, before there were even CCR, their label just changed their name to The Gollywogs without even asking them. Then in the 70s, at the absolute peak of their fame, their entire life savings just, poof, vanished. And then, of course, the 1985 lawsuit. This wasn't just a string of bad luck, this was a system that was set up to work against the artists.
And we need to talk about that name, the Gollywogs. The band had no idea at the time, they were just kids, but a gollywog is a deeply offensive, racist caricature. The record label just slapped that name on them to try and sound more British, more trendy. It shows a complete and total lack of respect for them, not just as musicians, but as human beings.
And the story about their lost money? It's something straight out of a spy movie. The record company convinced them to put all their money in this offshore bank in the Bahamas called Castle Bank. And then one day, the bank was just gone, and so was all their money. It came out later that this bank was reportedly a front used by the CIA for covert ops. So Creedence Clearwater Revival's entire fortune was stolen, quite possibly by the CIA. You literally cannot make this stuff up.
And all of that history just culminates in this one lawsuit. Saul Zaentz sued Fogerty for an absolutely unbelievable amount of money, $144 million. In 1985, that number was astronomical. It was clearly meant to do one thing, crush him, financially and psychologically.
But all this pressure, all this injustice, it has to go somewhere. And for a songwriter like John Fogerty, it got channeled directly into his art, creating some of the most powerful and timeless anthems in rock and roll history.
I mean, just look at Fortunate Son. Fogerty himself had served in the Army Reserves. He wrote that entire song in about 20 minutes, just boiling with rage because he kept seeing the sons of powerful people, senators, millionaires, getting out of the Vietnam draft while regular guys had to go and fight. The song is just a raw blast of anger at a system that felt completely rigged.
But then you have the creation of Proud Mary, which was just as explosive but came from a totally different place. The very day he got his honorable discharge papers from the Army, he was so filled with joy and relief that he literally did a cartwheel on his front lawn, ran inside, and within an hour had basically written this all-time American classic. That first line, "Left a good job in the city," was literally just him celebrating being free.
But even when he finally got that huge solo success, that feeling of vindication he'd been fighting for, it came at a really profound personal cost.
So just try to imagine it. You have been through the ringer for 15 years. Awful legal battles, your band breaks up bitterly, creative silence. Then you come back with Centerfield and it's a #1 smash. You won. You should be on top of the world, right? Well,
That's not exactly what happened. The emotional whiplash was just staggering. You can see it in his music. Centerfield in '85 is pure joy, it's triumphant. His very next album, Eye of the Zombie in '86, is dark, bitter, and just plain angry. The success didn't bring him peace. It just unlocked all the rage he'd been suppressing for years.
And Fogerty had this incredibly powerful way of explaining it. He said getting that #1 album was like being locked away in prison for years for a crime you didn't commit. You're finally set free, you walk out into the sunshine, but then you turn around and you see the prison walls, and all that joy just evaporates, and you're left with pure anger at the injustice of it all.
And that anger, it sent him into a really dangerous spiral. He became miserable to be around, deeply bitter, and started drinking heavily. So here he is at the absolute peak of his solo career, and he felt completely and utterly lost, with no idea how to find his way back.
Which, thankfully, brings us to the last and I think the most hopeful chapter in the story. His long journey back to healing and rediscovering the joy in his life and in his music.
So what saved him? The simple answer is he met his wife, Julie, and his own words about her are just incredibly stark. He says, flat out, without her, he'd probably be dead. It was that serious. He just didn't see another way out of the darkness he was in.
She was really the turning point. She helped him work through decades of trauma, let go of all the shame and anger he'd been carrying around for so long, and finally, find a way to be happy again, to reconnect with his music not as a source of pain, but as a source of pure joy. So this brings the entire story full circle. After all the betrayals, the lawsuits, the fighting just to reclaim his own voice, what happened to the music that was at the center of it all?
And this, right here, is the perfect ending. Today, John Fogerty gets up on stage and plays those legendary songs, but now his band is made up of his own sons. After a lifetime of fighting, he's finally in a band that's built on love, not conflict. He didn't just win back his sound, he won back his legacy, and most importantly, he won back his joy.